Welcome to the inaugural episode of this STEM Boss, where we empower minds and ignite futures. Today we have a special guest, a trailblazer in the STEM field, Miss Leneka Rhoden. We know that the Caribbean is not short of talent, but we're not just known for sports and music. We are also trailblazers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Miss Leneka Rhoden is an environmental advocate, a climate change specialist, and author. She's doing a bag of things. So, welcome, Miss Leneka Rhoden. How are you doing today?
Hi, Miss Hilton. Thank you so much for having me on the STEM Boss podcast. I'm delighted to be here. I'm great. And how are you doing?
Awesome. Thank you. So, Lenik, I have a couple questions for you, right? And I'm sure audience are dying to know a little bit more about you. Who is this young lady, right? Who is this person? How did your journey start? How did it begin in climate? A climate change specialist. How did it all begin?
Okay, so I did my first degree in marine biology, and while I was at the University of the West Indies, I would have been pretty much involved in a lot of the programs that surrounded, um, the whole marine biology program. So there was an opportunity for me to, for example, work at the Port Royal Marine Lab during the summer as a camp tutor, and throughout that experience, really just teaching young kids about, why should we safeguard the environment. um, my passion also began to blossom, and then of course working now on larger projects, because you get that experience working at the lab, and then the lecturers start to expose you to other opportunities, and then you're seeing what's happening on the international scale. You're getting involved in the international discussions, and then you're also in the lab, um, cooking up the solution to some of the problems that exist. And so now you just become a part of the entire ecosystem that surrounds climate change.
Right. So, were you exposed to any sort of mentorship? Did you see a woman, for example, that you admired? And
Yeah,
because
definitely.
you have the MBA, you're, I said MPhil pending, all of these things. Plus, you were able to get your master's in environmental biology or marine biology. That's
Yeah,
what you did
so
for your master's, right? And then now you are dealing with climate change. You have traveled to Egypt, Dubai, New York. So, you are a young person still very much in your 20s. And I'm sure a lot of persons can relate, and want to maybe be where you are today. So, can you just tell them a little bit more about what inspired that little girl in Lenika? What made her decide to choose this path and just go after what it is that she wanted and she believed in, and grabbing it with both hands.
I've always been a scientist. I've always been curious about how our world works. And then when I was introduced to all the different terminologies that you're introduced at the university level, you begin to learn about an ecosystem. And any little change in an ecosystem disrupts the sustainability of that ecosystem, or the ability of that ecosystem to survive, to provide for all the organisms that live within that ecosystem. And so you spoke about mentors. I think mentors played a critical role in my journey. Professor Mona Weber, for example, in my third year, it's something I always share with people. I remember Professor Mona Weber, she lent me her textbook, and this is a big shot lecturer, and I was so thrilled to be in her class first and foremost. And when she lent me her one textbook, her only textbook that she used during her time, I say, I'm special. I must be so special to this lady that she lent me her textbook. I must shut up the exam and shut up the course. And I did extremely well in her course. And I also have to give credit to Professor Michael Taylor, who is the head of the climate change studies group at the University of the West Indies. He played a pivotal role in perhaps me looking at opportunities outside of Jamaica. So I've seen where he would have represented us on the international scale at different conferences. He would have been he's seen as a whole international expert in the field, and that really inspires me to see someone who is from Jamaica representing us, and even Professor Tanisha Stevenson, who, you know, she's a woman just like myself, so she's a woman in STEM, and she has been trailblazing the way for us young women to you know, walk in her footsteps.
Right. I'm happy that you mentioned all these different professors and persons that you would have looked up to and admired, and even look at what it is that they have done as well, because they would have already created that blueprint for you to see, okay, they have done these conferences, they're doing this, and you know, and maybe even start to knock up yourself and get involved as well. Right. So I'm happy to hear that. That's truly inspiring. So I want to ask you another question, Lenika. So, as a young Caribbean woman in the field of climate change, what are some challenges you have faced?
So, you know, I'm going to put a spin on that question in terms of challenges. So, usually we see challenges in a negative light, but I want to just highlight the fact that the challenges that I face is the fact that there's just so many opportunities. I wish there was more of me. The project load, the and even being a woman in the space, there are spaces or opportunities or programs created just for women in STEM, women in climate leadership. In fact, at the end of April, there is a conference being held in the Bahamas for women in climate leadership, and that's sponsored by the Clinton Foundation. And so there are a lot of activities, a lot of networking opportunities too for women in the field, capacity building, you name it, the list goes on, and even funding for projects. All you need to do is be a woman and be passionate about the environment. And I just feel like the challenges will start to hit you. You realize that you really, you will not be enough to cover all the ground that there is to cover. You can't reap the full advantage and benefits because you just don't have enough hours in the day to take on everything that is out there to be had.
And I know you try, Lenita. I know you try to take on as much as you can, right? And you know, I can totally relate to that. And I love the fact that you said there are not challenges that you're seeing right now, but opportunities. Because you know that climate change and climate resilience and all of those things are things that we are pushing globally. And so it's great to see them creating spaces for women in that area, because you know, as it relates to climate change, women are sometimes the most affected when we lose our economic, we lose beaches and you know our livelihood. Many times it's our homes, and women are heads of those homes, right? So we know that a lot of times women are affected by that. So I'm happy to see that globally there is so many opportunities for women, not just here in Jamaica, but to travel overseas and to be a part of everything that is happening, conferences and so forth. So I'm happy you shed some light on that. So, with your dedication, Lenika, in all of these things, have you ever seen any sort of stereotype as it relates to you being a woman from the Caribbean, that when you travel to these international conferences, are there anything that you have encountered, any biases?
Okay, so again, I have to put a spin on that question because the experience has been so great, Miss
Yes.
Hilton. It has been phenomenal. In fact, when they hear that you are from the global south, they just want you on their team. They want you in their project. They want you to contribute to the discussion. They want you to talk about the effects that you have been seeing or the impacts that you've been seeing in your communities. They're asking you about your friends in other countries. Sometimes you don't even know nobody else in the other island, you know, but they're asking you these things because they are just so intrigued about what's happening. Because really and truly, I feel as if Small island states have represented themselves well on the global stage. And so we are the ones who would have started the discussion. We were the first ones to bring up the whole issue of climate change and the fact that there needs to be some attention to loss and damage, for example. We have been, I feel as if we have been leading when it comes on to climate resilience, despite the fact that we do lack the resources to implement a lot of these strategies. But
Yeah.
we have been representing ourselves well. And so when we go into those spaces, we are seen as experts, or as people who live the reality or see
Yeah.
it more often than those who are from the developed world.
So did you meet like at one of these conferences the Prime Minister of Barbados?
I missed her. She would
She's
have
such
been
an
at COP, but I missed
inspiration.
her. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's such an inspiration. And I'm sure she also made a lot of some bold statements as it relates
Yeah.
to climate change and or small island states, right?
She's a part of the
So
voice
what
that
are
have
yes,
represented us well.
yeah. So can you share with us some of the initiatives you've undertaken to address climate change and promote sustainability in the Caribbean?
Okay, so I'll address this broadly because I can't speak to specific examples just right now. But I would have participated in quite a number of conferences. Of course, I attended the Caribbean and Latin American Climate Week, New York Climate Week. I would have participated in workshops, you know, the usual panel discussions. I would have led training sessions. But I guess most importantly, the roles that I would have played, such as serving as a coordinator of the Commonwealth Youth Climate Change Network,
Yes.
um, you know, youth ambassador for the High Seas Alliance. And I'm still now working with them. So I serve as a member of the working group for CARICOM and the working group for the Pacific Islands, where we're looking at ratifying the High Seas Treaty within those regions. And then there are a lot of other things that I do. So I work on different multi-scale projects. So projects that look at implementing policies to build climate resilience in countries that don't yet have a policy in place, because that still exists. And work on projects that, just collecting data on the ground, talking to people, finding out how is it that climate change is impacting their livelihoods or impacting their movement, in terms of climate migration, or how it affects even their health, which is an interesting project that I worked on recently that looked at climate and health, and how the heat has been affecting women in particular, for example,
Mhm.
women who are going through menopause. The heat kind of, it disrupts their whole hormonal
Balance
balance
and
and all of that. So yeah.
wow, that's actually quite interesting. I definitely have to do some more research on that because I never thought about that. I mean, many times, when it gets hot, we get so miserable as women, we really can't take the heat. But I've never looked at or even considered the possibility that it would affect women, especially who are going through hot flashes, maybe 10 times worse. Can you
Yeah,
imagine
it
going through hot
does.
flashes in a Jamaican summer heat? That's crazy, right? So yeah, I've never thought about that. So that's a great interest and great point there. So you've been doing some incredible work, Leneka. I see where you mentioned about creating a policy or being instrumental in the creation of a particular policy and contributing to various book chapters. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so because I still do research with the University of the West Indies, so I participate in a lot of in contributing to research and writing book chapters, really research papers in the form of a book chapter where we look at marine ecosystems, we look at the impacts of climate change, and we also look at the role of the private sector and public sector as it pertains to the whole climate resiliency building. And these book chapters would have been through invitations from different universities. So, for example, University of Miami. Uh, yeah, and I would have done some work with Springer Nature as it pertains to women in STEM, particularly those who want to elevate their careers. So, there might be a woman who is, let's say, she's used to being in the lab, but she wants to now get some experience working on projects.
Wow.
So how does she, make that transition from the lab to a more administrative role where she's now writing project proposals, managing teams, organizing meetings, coordinating, and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is so important because I know many times, like when a person is a scientist and you're in the lab, you don't really get the opportunity to maybe branch out or upskill in those various areas. And then that is so important for women to advance and to occupy leadership roles. So that's so important. Thank you so much, Leneka, for your work in doing that and also for sharing that with us. Now, as we wrap up, what advice would you give to aspiring scientists and climate change specialists? What advice would you give to our young people, Leneka, that
Well,
see a young woman like yourself and want to be like Leneka a few years from now? What advice would you
so I'll say, this advice was actually given to me by someone who I look up to and have much respect for, and that's Professor Donovan Campbell. So he said that, you have to ensure that you build your capacity, right? And I think that's so important, especially for young people. A lot of times we are excited about opportunities and we offer ourselves up, but we need to ensure that we have an understanding of the issues that we truly represent, and not only our opinion, but that we do the necessary research and we try to keep up to date in terms of attending the relevant capacity building sessions.
give?
So, for example, there is the Commonwealth Blue Charter. If you go on their website, they have free courses, free training programs. You can take these courses, get certified, and go on to the next thing. There's so many free training programs that usually the World Bank or the United Nations would have, and so it's just so important for us to just take advantage of those opportunities, learn what we need to learn, so that we don't look like an imposter, but we show up with substance and we're able to contribute to conversations meaningfully.
Right. I love that because it's talk about building your capacity, and you have accomplished so much in terms of academically, and also all the different awards that you have won. So clearly, you're a young woman that believes in building her capacity and improving herself and staying ready, right? And you also mentioned about, not feeling like an imposter. And many times as women, we suffer from that imposter syndrome, and so
Mm.
I feel like that is a great way to overcome that in terms of building your capacity, being well read, and
Mm.
specializing and focusing on the various areas so that when you get into a room, you not only speak loud, but you are competent in what it is that you are saying. Right, Lenika?
Yes, amen to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, very wise words indeed, Lenisa. I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience with us today. I definitely feel that your journey is a testament to the power of entrepreneurship. And if you tell us a little bit about, you being an entrepreneur. So let us hear a little bit about that before we actually wrap up completely. So you have like several businesses, right, Nika, or started or founded a couple. What do you want to
Right.
tell us about that?
So I would have started eBiome, for example, in 2018. It's a scientific research and development consultancy where we focus on environmental projects. So we have a huge team, a global team. We recently
Wow.
did a whole restructuring. So we have over 80 team members across the Caribbean and African region. And we have been collaborating with local entities to provide support in terms of doing ecosystem assessments. We have a team of divers, and of course, we dabble a little bit into offering STEM programs. So, for example, we have a Summer of STEM camp, and we also have an international scientist program, which is a cultural exchange program that we're currently working with a partner in St. Lucia to execute. So that's pretty much it. And I have a driving school and some other little projects that I do on the side.
Awesome. I don't know how you find the time. And especially that driving school, because they always hear that women can't drive. So to have a woman owning a driving school, that's like definitely STEM boss moves, right? So
Very much, Leneka. This has been an exciting episode of the STEM Boss featuring Miss Leneka Rhoden. I'm your host, Kabel Hilton, and I just want to say to you, continue to empower minds and ignite futures. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.